So Republicans are going crazy, frustrated over the fact that Democrats succeeded in passing the Inflation Reduction Act. Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS of the MAGA crowd. So Fox News has been spreading all kinds of BS talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. Here's one example, and let's react to it. Check it out.
Senate Democrats striking a deal on a massive spending bill aimed at reducing inflation. What a dichotomy.
Yeah, I don't really think it is, but I'm going to read. You read that, and we'll go with that. All right. Senator Joe Manchin touting the Inflation Reduction Act as a bill for America, claiming it will lower drug costs, increase energy security, and even reduce America's debt.
But what are the hidden...
Okay, let's start with the fact that Fox and the Republicans are going crazy over this sense that Joe Manchin has signed on with the Democrats to do this. Now, one thing to note is Joe Manchin's a Democrat. I mean, sometimes we wonder about that, but the fact of the matter is he's a lifelong Democrat. He spoke at the Democratic National Convention, and he's somebody who consistently has taken positions while some of them we might not be in favor of. He's always said, for example, that he's in favor of unions. He's always said that he's in favor of higher taxes for the wealthy. He's always said that he's in favor of increased unemployment benefits. So even though he's sometimes positioned as this conservative Democrat representing a state that overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump, the fact of the matter is he is still a Democrat, and his signing on to this legislation should be no surprise to Republicans. Part of the reason, though, that Republicans are especially frustrated over this is that Mitch McConnell had threatened to sink the CHIPS Act, which is the bill aimed at helping the American semiconductor industry compete better with China, if the Democrats went ahead and passed their climate bill. With Joe Manchin saying that he was not in favor of the bill, obviously McConnell thought that it was off the table. And isn't it funny that almost as soon as the CHIPS Act, Joe Manchin came out and said that he was in favor of this new deal that he'd come up with Chuck Schumer. So although there was never any deal between the Republicans and Joe Manchin, they feel like somehow they got blindsided by his support, which is part of the reason that they're so upset about this. Let's see some more of this discussion.
Here to break it down, Fox News contributor and former House Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz. Jason, welcome. And first of all, how does Joe Manchin get on board with a bill that essentially attacks coal?
Look, what you got to understand about this bill is that it's not done yet. Kirsten Sinema has not weighed in yet.
Okay, two thoughts on this. Number one, West Virginia has really moved on from coal. The majority of its employment actually is related to healthcare now. Coal is an industry in decline, and there's nothing that can be done about it. You had Donald Trump, who did his best to try to prop up coal during his last administration, and obviously the employment in coal has only continued to decline and only will continue to do so in the long run. So part of what Joe Manchin, I think, has signed on for is for a reinvigoration of the energy industry, creating new jobs that will help people who've been working in the coal industry or maybe who've been laid off, finding new opportunities in the new industry. The second thing is, I love watching this video because this actually was made just before Kirsten Sinema had signed on with the legislation. And you can see the Republicans grasping at straws, hoping, oh my gosh, I hope she doesn't support it. But guess what? Tough luck. She did support it. Let's see some more.
Joe Manchin, and he went against his pledges. It raises taxes, which he said he shouldn't do. Even Barack Obama said we shouldn't raise taxes during a recession. The other thing is it's a massive spending bill. Remember,
Okay, let's be clear about this whole raising taxes thing. Number one, it does not raise taxes on anybody who earns less than $400,000 a year. So if you earn less than $400,000 a year, you have nothing to worry about. Both Joe Manchin, Joe Biden, and Barack Obama have all said that we need to increase taxes on the wealthy, and that the tax giveaway to the wealthy that was done under the Trump administration needs to be rolled back, at least in part.
in the week they passed the CHIPS bill.
Yeah.
So if you add the CHIPS bill plus what they're trying to do in reconciliation, it's $700 billion in new.
Okay, let's talk about that for starters. The spending that they're talking about, number one, is over a number of years. So this is not each year that this amount of money is going to be spent. So as a percentage of the nation's gross domestic product, you're talking a very small amount of money, even though it sounds like a lot, and it does. It is a lot of money. But in the global scheme of things, when you look at the overall American economy, it's actually a relatively small amount of money. Secondly, the CHIPS Act was passed with bipartisan support, a number of Republicans supporting it, including Mitch McConnell. And finally, the thing that's not being talked about are the revenues. You know, on the one hand, they bitch about the fact that this raises taxes on the wealthy, but on the other hand, then they say, oh, this is extra spending. Well, you can't have it both ways. Either you're bringing in the revenues to pay for the legislation, or you're doing the extra spending. In this case, even if we take the $700 billion figure that Chaffetz is throwing out here, the full amounts that we're talking about is actually raised in the new taxes by this legislation. Again, new taxes on people who earn more than $400,000 a year.
Spending. Don't tell me that it's going to reduce inflation. They're going to pour more money into the economy. What's that going to do? And the other thing is,
again, the key is that they're not pouring more money into the economy, because actually they're taking money out of the economy with these tax increases on the wealthy.
It's not going to reduce the deficit. They're counting on hundreds of billions of dollars in new revenue by IRS tax enforcement, which never comes to fruition. I don't care what you say, folks. It doesn't come to fruition.
Number one, the IRS has basically been starved for the last 10 years by Republicans who've been trying to cut back on its enforcement mechanism because of the fact that it was too aggressive going up against people who, wait for it, earn more than $400,000 a year, or corporations who don't pay any taxes. So the fact is, increasing IRS enforcement actually is going to bring in revenues. And in fact, most of the estimates are that it's going to bring in more revenues than is anticipated as part of this legislation.
Beware of this bill. I don't know how Joe Manchin, when this bill raises taxes on coal production in West Virginia, good luck explaining that to the good people of West Virginia.
And meanwhile,
again, West Virginia is no longer a coal state the way that it was presented at one point. Donald Trump did his best to try to turn coal into the dominant energy source again. But the fact of the matter is, we're in an era where the cost of renewable energies keeps coming down, and Joe Manchin is basically saying that he wants his state to be a part of it.
China, they're building coal plants. And by the way, the bill also...
All right, wait a second here. China is building coal plants. She's right about that. However, we also just received news that China is dealing with all sorts of problems now in terms of droughts and in terms of lakes and rivers drying up as a result of climate change. So the fact is that their short-term idea of building coal plants is very quickly going to become a problem that they're going to have to address.
Is being touted by Al Gore because it has so much of the climate goodies that they want in it. Is this the trick that they take something called the Inflation Reduction Act and they basically are tucking all the Green New Deal stuff into it because they know they can't?
This is really what has Republicans upset. The Democrats did a great job with this. I mean, in terms of this being an Inflation Reduction Act, that's basically, frankly, a marketing mechanism. Will it have a positive impact on inflation? Probably, over the long run, but it'll be small. What this primarily is this is a climate bill. In fact, this does include almost everything for the climate that was included in the Build Back Better bill. You remember that $2 trillion bill that was defeated a while ago? Well, we essentially have the entire climate program from there included in this legislation, which is part of what's driving the Republicans crazy. In addition to that, we also have some healthcare legislation, which we're going to get to in a few minutes here.
Pass it, but they just put it in behind these kinds of...
There is no justification by spending $700 billion with these two bills that you can say you are going to reduce inflation. I think it's going to have the exact opposite effect. We're spending more than $6 trillion in this country.
I think it's worth noting right there, even their graphic says total deficit reduction, $300 billion. And again, the sense is that by reducing the deficit and by increasing taxes slightly on the wealthy, what that does is kind of take some money out of circulation, which in the long run is going to have a positive impact, although a small impact, but still a positive impact on inflation. And then you can't also have to talk about the fact that one of the biggest drivers of inflation here in the country is healthcare costs. So allowing Medicare to be able to negotiate drug prices is actually going to be something that could reduce the growth of costs there, thus reducing inflation.
25% of our GDP, 1 out of every $4 in this country is being spent by the federal government.
Okay, I can't sit here and listen to this. Here they are complaining about the fact that, all this money is being spent by the federal government when the deficit has gone down under Joe Biden. The biggest increases in the deficit came from, wait for it, the Republicans with Donald Trump, who basically spent money like drunken sailors while cutting taxes. So I am sick of hearing this deficit reduction talk from these people who basically, when a Republican was in charge, were happy to spend money like there was no tomorrow.
The problem, folks, the $1.9 trillion that you passed last year exacerbated the problem. Pouring another $700 billion is not going to solve it. And when you have people like John Kerry and Elizabeth Warren and those greenies out there saying, this is the best green bill ever to pass, how does Joe Manchin get behind that? That's just...
Joe Manchin gets behind it, number one, because of the fact that it does include deficit reduction. Number two, because of the fact that it's going to help with jobs, which he's not an idiot. He realizes that coal is on its way out. And so the better thing is to get on board and to be able to increase the possibility of people being able to get jobs in these new renewable energy industries. And finally, look, we've got to be honest about this. Joe Manchin did get some stuff in there about carbon capture, something that, frankly, is probably a waste, something that is essentially something to try to prop up the fossil fuels industries a little bit. I mean, that's just the way it's going to be with Joe Manchin. But the fact of the matter is all the analyses show that impact is tiny compared to the overall impact that this legislation will have.
Unbelievable to me. Great editorial in the Wall Street Journal today for this. What was the deal that Manchin struck in order to do this? Nobody really knows.
Joe Manchin strikes, again, real quick, if y'all can put it up on the screen, I just want the audience to know, 15% corporate tax minimum, prescription drug pricing reform. This is one of the goodies, right?
Yeah, they say, it's a goodie, the prescription drug reform. Yeah, it's a goodie because people want it, and the Republicans have been fighting against it for years.
That they're using as a dead pill. The IRS tax enforcement as
that means they're hiring more IRS agents to get on us.
So,
I think that they probably are going after them because I'm guessing that every one of these Fox News hosts earns more than $400,000 a year, which means that the IRS might be going after them. The people it won't be going after are the people like you and me who earn less than that.
Again, they can name it whatever they want to name it. Increasing spending at the end of the day is going to only drive inflation.
And a few days before.
Again, they're increasing spending less than they're increasing taxes. You can't have it both ways, guys. You can't complain about the fact that you're raising taxes while at the same time complaining about extra spending. That's being responsible. And in fact, the legislation raises more in taxes than it spends, which is exactly what results in the reduction to the deficit.
For that, they passed the CHIPS bill. And shame on those senators who voted in favor of that bill. Because,
you mean the Republicans?
Yes, the Republicans.
Okay, the CHIPS bill. Let's just take a moment to talk about that. Number one, as they point out, this was a bipartisan piece of legislation which received quite a bit of support from Republicans, although the majority of them voted against it. Secondly, let's just talk about what this legislation is. This is legislation basically to help America compete better against China. One of the advantages that the United States has had over time is the fact that we have these high-tech industries which are able to keep the United States ahead of the curve. Well, China's been doing everything it can, using every tool in its arsenal to try to essentially take away that leadership position we have. This legislation is designed to counter it, and that's why so many Republicans ended up voting in favor of it. If you're not in favor of that, well, maybe you're just in favor of handing the keys over to China and letting everything go to chaos then.
Republicans who got behind that and made that happen because, again, the combination, maybe $700 billion.
You know, maybe it's just Manchin. He's taking all the arrows. Maybe he's telling Sinema it's your turn to take some arrows.
Yeah. Well, she hasn't said yet, so they don't have a deal yet.
Oh, boo-hoo. Guess what? They do have a deal, and Sinema supported it. And oh, boo-hoo, poor Republicans.
All right.
That is the $1 million question there. We'll have to see.
Well,
what she
$700 billion question, yeah.
Good point.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
All right, so there you have it. The Republicans are really frustrated and disappointed about the fact that Democrats got something important done. And this is on top of the fact that we got infrastructure legislation, that we got a gun bill, and that we got the legislation to address the veterans who've been dealing with injuries as a result of burn pits. The fact of the matter is the Democrats are looking like they're actually running a decent government right now, which is quite a contrast from what we saw when the Republicans were in charge. And that is exactly what's driving the Republicans crazy. Well, if you want to see more about how the economic data has supported the Democrats' agenda, check out this video I did over here. It includes a lot of information about things that weren't included in this legislation, but also includes some things that were. I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.